afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I am Asada Rashidi, the Environmental Justice Organizer for South Florida Environmental Alliance, and I also serve as one of the vice co-chairs for the National Environmental Youth Advisory Council. Today, I'll be the moderator for this session. We have an exciting session that's titled Environmental Justice, Goods Movement, and Air Quality Issues in New Jersey. This session will take on the style of a PowerPoint presentation, and then after we will have 15 to 20 minutes to open it up for question and answers. I will go ahead and introduce our esteemed panelists. So first we have Ms. Kim Gaddy. She is the founder and executive director of the South Florida Environmental Alliance, a grassroots organization empowering Newark residents to address environmental injustices. With over 20 years of advocacy experience, she has led efforts to combat industrial pollution and the goods movement systems in Newark and beyond. Ms. Gaddy served as the chair of the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection's Environmental Justice Advisory Council and is the founding member of New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance. And her work ensures that residents have a voice in shaping the policies that impact their communities. Up next, we will have Vivek. And please forgive me, Vivek, or how I pronounce your last name. Ravichandran. Thank you. Vivek Ravichandran is a PhD student at the University of Maryland, the School of Public Health, specializing in environmental health. Under the mentorship of Dr. Sokobi Wilson at Siege, Vivek leads air quality monitoring projects across the Mid-Atlantic, including Maryland and North New Jersey. He also manages the Environmental Protection Agency's funded American Rescue Plan Community Air Monitoring Project, focusing on communities in Maryland. Following, we will have Terrence, possibly. And Terrence Bigston is a Newark native and a national environmental justice activist with over 2 decades of experience. He has held leadership roles, including directing the Newark Youth One-Stop Career Center and serving on the Environmental Justice Advisory Council for New Jersey. Currently, he works as a senior ports and freight campaigns manager for Friends of the Earth, advocating for reduced air pollution from port activity across multiple U.S. regions. And finally, we will have Candace Perry, the director of the Office of Environmental Justice at the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, where she leads efforts to integrate environmental justice across state policies and programs. She facilitates the environmental justice interagency and advisory councils and serves as a key advocate for overburdened communities. I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today, and without further ado, we will get right into the presentations, starting with Ms. Gaddy.
Thank you, Asada, for that introduction, and good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
As Asada mentioned, I am the founder and executive director of the South Florida Environmental Alliance, and I will be sharing with you a snapshot of what our community is exposed to on a daily basis. Before I start, I do want to thank Vivek and Dr. Sokobi Wilson for working with us over the last 2 years on our hyperlocal air quality monitoring project. And you will see through some of the slides the work that we have been conducting. I got into this space because I was a mother of 3 asthmatic children. I currently still have 2 children. I lost my son to a premature heart attack at the age of 32. And all of this is connected to the pollution sources that people of color suffer from each and every day. Our backyard is the backyard of the 3rd largest port in Newark, New Jersey, where 25,000 trucks come in and out of that port on a daily basis. Next slide. When we do our truck counts in our community, we do them because we just want to breathe. It is so important that when you think about the life of our children and our elderly and those who are most compromised, we have to begin to look at what is happening in our communities. Why can't our children breathe? Why is it that 1 out of 4 children in the city of Newark suffer from asthma? Why is it that in 2024, we are still experiencing deaths from asthmatic attacks from individuals in our community. And so that's why it's crucially important that we conduct air quality monitoring projects to identify the air pollution risk faced by our Newark community and provide them with the data so they can understand what's happening. Next slide. In this slide, you will see, we call it our industry versus residents. The South Ward is the largest ward in the city of Newark. We have 80,000 residents. It's 1/5 of our city. In this map here, you can see, this is what we call our Dayton Street neighborhood. This is where 85% of the population lives in Newark public housing. So our senior citizen, our most vulnerable population, and our youth. Along this corridor, we have a Superfund site. We have at least 6 to 7 different recycling facilities. We have the largest metals management recycling company in the world. That metal company is located in 2 wards in our city. The East Ward, Ironbound, which is another EJ overburdened community, and the South Ward, and then it's at the port. And when you think about looking at these, the different industries, we are exposed to cumulative impacts of pollution on a daily basis. We know that our port is the economic engine of the region, but it is a diesel death zone for so many of us who live in these communities. And so as you can see, this is what they face on a daily basis. Next slide. When we think about the diesel air pollution in our community, these are some pictures of the trucks that come in and out of our neighborhoods. Asada, as the environmental justice organizer for Southwood Environmental Alliance, conduct two truck counts yearly. And within an hour, the lowest number of trucks that travel between a 6 to 8 block radius is 200 to 450. And as things are changing, the numbers are going up higher and higher. And so this is one of those examples of what our community is exposed to. Next slide. We all know the effects of health that occurs with all of these pollution sources. You heard from the previous panel, same story, right? Different neighborhood, different city. But what is the same is it's people of color. It's low-income individuals who are trying to live a life free of pollution, but because of our zip code and the color of our skin, we are disproportionately polluted upon. Next slide. This is just one of the maps of Essex County. We have 21 municipalities that make up our county, and you can see from this map where Newark is, it is definitely the highest. Next slide. We actually conducted with CAPA Strategies in 2021. They came through our community and our partnership with the Nature Conservancy and conducted heat maps. Because not only are we dealing with the pollution from the trucks, the port, the airport, we live in a community where it's hot. Our communities are overheated. Climate change impacts the quality of life of so many of our residents. And again, disproportionately. And so these maps actually show how hot it is in our communities and in our neighborhoods. And I bring this up too because we're looking at tree canopy in these communities. Some of these neighborhoods, some don't have bus shelters. And so we're actually in the process of trying to apply for an EPA community change grant to create bus shelters, which most communities should have, but we don't, with missing stations, and then plant trees as a way to buffer and protect some of these community members from this experience. Next slide. This is just a picture of when Asada was working with Rutgers, with the PurpleAir monitoring, capturing how she was able to co-locate our monitors with the VEC help and the scientists from Rutgers University. And now, because of the VEC, and he will elaborate on this, we actually have the C12 black carbon monitor as well, because we understand that there are multiple sources of pollution, and we need to make sure that we are changing with that technology so we are providing the best data so that our community can protect themselves from harm. Next slide. So you saw this in again, the previous panel where this is our PurpleAir sensor. That's our C12 black carbon monitor. We actually use air beams, and Asada is extremely excited about the aethalometer. We have members who work as longshoremen. Our port organizer, Regina, is working with longshoremen at our port to actually wear this. Members of our Air Quality Advisory Council, our senior citizens, and so that we can get, the proper reading through these different pieces of monitoring sensors. And it is so important because it tells a different story. And it's also an engaging tool. We believe, in the principle that our community are the experts. So in order for them to understand what is happening, we have to provide them with the necessary tools so that they can increase their expertise and their knowledge so that they then can advocate for themselves for the changes that they see in their communities. Next slide. This just shows some of the readings from the PurpleAir map. I heard, I don't know if it was Dr. Wilson or a couple speakers before him, when they had the wildfires from the Canadian wildfires, they was able to see how terrible the air quality was because of we have 8 monitors or something. We have 9 monitors in the city of Newark, and they was able to see how bad the air quality was by our monitors that was present. Next slide. And this is just some of those monitors that we have located in different locations. We wanted to, and that's Mr. Bankston there, who's one of our panelists. And these are some of the places we have them at a church, early childhood center, a Club Eclipse is a social event, North Cathedral, which is our medical hospital. They have partnered with us. Weequahic Park, where our families recreate. And then the International Longshoremen's building. And that's really important because this is our community. And we want to make sure that everyone is part of this monitoring. Next slide. This just shows when Asada actually co-located. We had a Newark Fire Department where the main state regulatory monitor was. Right now, it's been offline for 7 months. So we don't know when it's going to be up, but we wanted to make sure that it was connected to their data because our DEP is a partner with us and they've been helping us through this process, and we appreciate their expertise and knowledge, and so this was part of that. Next slide. This is just some of the data, as I mentioned, the truck counts that we have. In April 2022, we counted 5,785 trucks. And this is, I tell you, the times that we do a truck count is for 1 hour from 9 to 10, 1 hour from 12 to 1, and then from 4 to 5. And these are the numbers that you see. So that's a snapshot. That's 3 hours out of the whole day. And this is the numbers that show up in our communities. Next slide. This is just some pictures. We have a picture there of our former Congressman, Donald Payne Jr. He has triplets, and he got involved as our councilman because he connected to my story, the triplets that he has. 2 of them had asthma, and he immediately became our environmental champion. And so whenever we're doing any activities, he, along with the former Congressman Donald Payne Sr., was always supportive of what we did in our community. Next slide. So when you talk about solutions, we truly believe in electrification of our freight transportation system. As Dr. Wilson stated earlier, the Biden-Harris administration has been that administration that has really provided not only the funds, but they have actually committed to the work and really support the environmental justice organizations and the issues that we have been fighting for. And they're actually making sure that the money comes to our communities as well. And so they supported, they set the first ever national goal of zero emission freight sector, and they announced $1.5 billion. That was huge. We are still fighting in our state, and you'll hear from Candace Perry on some of the issues that our state is doing, but we're so appreciative of what our state is doing and how they're moving zero emissions and making sure that they are protecting the health, because they are the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, and they are protecting our environment for our residents and the individuals within the community. And so we're going to continue to push EPA to do right by us. Some of these things they've been working on, you know, we have to follow what happens in California, because California has different standards and regulations. They have a CARB board, which we don't have. And so we support those initiatives so that they can then be replicated and brought to each state, so we can have more power in our respective states. And so we push for alternative truck routes, which is something that we have the support of our local councilman and our mayor. We are pushing for zero emission zones and increasing, as I mentioned, our tree canopy. So that's just a snapshot into what we do. But I want to leave you with the fact that the power is always vested in the community. And for us to have a seat at the table and meaningful participation in what our community look like, that's what we will continue to fight for each and every day. This is my contact information, along with Asada Rashidi, our environmental justice organizer, and I thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gaddy, for giving us that snapshot into an overburdened community. You know, too often our communities are the dumping grounds, and we need to make sure that we are empowering our residents to be engaged in the policies that affect our community. So with that, I will bring up Vivek, who will get a little bit more into detail with the data that is collected through our projects.
Is this it? That's it? That's it?
All right, thank you, Asada, and great start to the presentation series, Ms. Gaddy. How do I follow that up? My presentation is going to be based off the data, based off the framework that we have set in place. So I'm Vivek Radichandran. I'm also an asthmatic, so you know these kind of projects are near and dear to me. So with that being said, we'll dive right into it. So I want to start by just describing what we do at Siege. As many of you already know from the earlier presentations yesterday and today, we advance environmental justice through community science, community-based participatory research. That means putting the science and the power into the hands of the people, of the residents. And we use this to address locally unwanted land uses, such as air pollution, such as soil contamination, such as water contamination. So these are just some ways that we advance EPC. Next slide, please. So I want to go over some key terms over here. The first is PM 2.5. This is fine particulate matter. Consists of particles that are 2.5 microns in diameter or smaller. This is one of the EPA's criteria air pollutants. So the EPA at the state level, the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection is tasked with regulating this pollutant under the authority of the Clean Air Act. And as you can see, we have EPA standards shown here in the table. But we also have stricter international guidelines set forth by the World Health Organization, as you also see here. And TRAP refers to traffic-related air pollution, which is important to note because this contributes to not just particulate matter, but more specifically black carbon, which we'll talk about shortly. So we don't have to go over this. This guy already went over it in our presentation. Let's continue. So the government regulates PM 2.5, but to do so, they use very costly, bulky equipment. So to address these gaps, we purchased low-cost real-time air monitors that can be deployed in bulk to provide more spatial coverage. An example here is the PurpleAir. So it's right over here. It has these dual chambers to detect the particles in the air, and it measures not just PM 2.5, but also PM 10, which are the larger particles, pollen, mold, allergens, things that affect folks who have asthma, as well as PM 1, which is even finer particles that go deep into your bloodstream and have various cardiopulmonary endpoints. The PurpleAir allows for you to store data directly onto a chip in the sensor, but also it can stream to what's known as the crowd map. So next slide. So this is an example of the crowd map. I think this, I'm gonna get my geography straight. This is Newark, okay. As a DMV resident, I'll try to make sure. So this is a snapshot. As you can see, the crowd map converts all the PurpleAir readings into an air quality index. So green indicates good air, yellow indicates moderate, but it does affect sensitive populations such as folks with asthma. But this is what the EPA considers safe. Anything above that would put that region in what's known as non-attainment, and the state must then develop state implementation plans to reduce the air quality, reduce the air pollution. Next slide. So another pollutant of interest is black carbon. This is not a criteria air pollutant. It's not regulated. There's no standard for it, but it is harmful at small concentrations, as small as 0.6 micrograms or 600 nanograms. To detect black carbon, we've deployed or started to deploy the C12 black carbon monitor. This has built-in cellular service, so you don't even need Wi-Fi signal. You can just plug it in into a power outlet, and it's good to go. You just plug it in, let it collect, and you observe the data remotely on a dashboard. So very, very easy to use, and the users will receive a link so they can access the data in real time. Next slide, please. So this is what you see on the dashboard. Essentially, it's geolocated here. So this is an example of one of our C12s in Maryland. And we have two columns here. The second column, where it says 880 nm, is actually black carbon. I won't get into why that's the case. It's very technical, but it's based on the optical attenuation. So just that's the column up here. And you can see there are peaks as well. So, anything above 600 nanograms, according to the literature, is considered hazardous to human health. So you can observe that, it's doing relatively well, but there's a peak around August 15th. Next slide. So, as already mentioned by Ms. Gaddy, Asada over here has helped co-locate these sensors. So what they're doing with SWIA is they're placing these low-cost instruments with the reference monitors. And what we've seen is that the performance of the C12s, our low-cost instruments, are 91% accurate compared to the reference monitors. So once we get that information, we can then redeploy those monitors and say, hey, the data that we're collecting can be useful and can be utilized to advocate for change. And for this particular study, we looked at PM 2.5 and black carbon using the PurpleAir and C12 black carbon monitors. Next slide. And so we can zoom through this, but these are just some of the sites. So these are the average PM 2.5 concentrations at each site. If you remember the table, the World Health Organization's guideline was 5. So as we scroll through, we have a PM 2.5 average of 7. Here at the Clinton Hill Early Childhood Center, so you have younger populations, children, 6.78, still above that guideline. Continue. At Weequahic Park, 7.24. At the Beth Israel Medical Center, 6.96. And then over here, by time of day, we can see that every time day, so whether it's the morning off-peak, so this is from 1 to 5 a.m., morning rush hour, afternoon off-peak, wherever it might be, it exceeds the international WHO annual guideline. When we look at season, I want to just emphasize that we looked at data from 2023, and who here knows what happened in the summer of 2023 that might have caused this spike?
Wildfire.
Exactly. So it just boosted those PM levels above the EPA, both the WHO and the EPA standard. And these are just the other seasons as well. So this is some new data. It's about a month and a half's worth of data at one of the residential sites for the C12 black carbon monitor. And I did mention this threshold as backed by the literature, and what we see here is that the black carbon levels are very, very hazardous. They're well above that. They're on par with what we see in Maryland, right adjacent to the Interstate 95 southbound at the rest stop. And that's a site where you have trucks that are forced to take breaks when they're doing long hauls, so they leave their trucks idling. You have a lot of highway traffic, and that's what this specific site is exposed to, honestly, throughout the day. Especially during the morning rush hour here, it exceeds 1,200.
And it's actually a solid house.
Yeah, I didn't know. But yeah, this is what Asada is being exposed to. Next slide. So key takeaways, the PM 2.5, while it does mostly meet the EPA annual guidelines, they all the sites exceed WHO's more protected guidelines. We see that as PM 2.5 actually increases into the summer. I didn't have that picture on this particular slide, so I apologize for that. But we do see that trend as we get to the summer months. And then black carbon levels were well above that threshold. So moving forward, we do want to add more black carbon monitors to see if that trend is true for other residents, other neighborhoods, and maybe even at these other PurpleAir sites like the childhood center and other areas. Next slide. So some next steps over here. One thing I really want to focus on is how do we detect other pollutants? So an example is the modulator. It is a multi-pollutant sensor. It's about $7,000, which is what the C12s are going to cost now because they've upgraded their system. Yeah, they're going to be expensive now, but still under what we see for the reference monitors. So we're able to measure not just PM10, PM 2.5, PM1, but also NOx, hydrogen dioxides, other criteria air pollutants, ozone, and carbon dioxide. And hopefully we can use this information to apportion the pollutants to their sources and help inform our policymakers and advocate for a cleaner Southport. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivek, for showing us what the data is and amplifying our stories in the South Ward. Next up, we will have Terrence Bankston.
Are you ready?
Do I use that so I can just replace it?
Is this his pro? This is?
No.
This is Candace's.
Yeah, let Candace go next while you give them your.
Yeah, I need
I
your.
uploaded it. You need me to send it to you?
Yeah, just email it if you could.
We will have
Sorry
Miss
about that.
Candace Perry.
No problem. Hey Candace, can I get you to hold 1 second while I get this? I gotta take this off the screen.
Okay.
Just 1 second.
May I ask a question about your data? I know this is relevant.
So the email you're gonna
about
send it to
New Jersey,
is-
And yet you talk about pretty much everything, what you'll probably find up and down 95.
You
Do
ready?
you think that some of those numbers, we find the same thing
Nobody.
here in Baltimore area as well, since the poll, they were doing
Okay, so
some of
where's
the
it
same
going to?
testing with some of the high.
IAN Ward.
Ward?
WARD.
Was, would we see similar results for the black carbon
2000.
data along Interstate 95 and specifically in Baltimore?
Oh yeah, at Gmail.
And we do currently have C12s collecting data in Curtis Bay, South Baltimore. There's actually, I think, a session going on in South Baltimore as well as Turner Station, which is in
What do you
Dugout,
do?
Maryland. And
I deal
before
with
the
ports in
bridge
the United
collapsed,
States and I work with the groups
the black carbon levels
are servicing the
were on
communities that
par
are
with
near
what we're
the
seeing
ports.
in
Okay.
South.
So you're not getting.
Once the
you're
bridge
in the
collapsed,
DMV? You're in Jersey.
they suddenly plummeted down. And so now what we're trying to do is look at the data following the, I think, the restructuring, the repositioning. Might be
definitely
back,
check.
I'm not sure, I have to double check. But seeing what the data looks like now. The problem is when the bridge collapsed, all the trucks were rerouted through Curtis Bay.
Oh, wow.
So they went from Turner Station, which is one of our other AJ communities, and they were all flowing through Curtis Bay, and then their levels skyrocketed. So the truck rerouting, the indirect truck rerouting, was not successful in this case, because you're going from one AJ community to another. So that's one way I think we can discuss, moving forward, how do we address situations like that? So, Hopefully that answered your question.
It did.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Candace Perry. I am the Environmental Justice Director at New Jersey's Department of Environmental Protection. Very happy to be here and to share a few remarks. So what I'm going to do is talk about the connections, or maybe I should say the disconnections, between air monitoring efforts at the state and very hyper-local air monitoring efforts in environmental justice communities using community science. So talk about some of those disconnections and then offer some solutions and some ideas that I have for bridging some of those gaps. So next slide. So before I do that, I just want to give you a little bit of background, especially for those who are not so familiar with New Jersey, to kind of tell you about some of the core air monitoring related functions that we do within the state of New Jersey. So the DEP operates 28 air monitoring stations across the state. So this is just a visual map for you to see where all of those air monitoring stations are located. At those 28, we have like approximately 100 air monitors at those stations. And so next slide, just to give you a, next slide.
Next slide. Hold on 1 second.
Okay.
Which slide?
Is that, oh, sorry.
You, go ahead.
The little blue dots, so is that New York, the border in New York, because you have a lot of clustered together right there?
No, everything that is being shown is the state of New Jersey.
Yes, ma'am, I was
Yeah.
saying you had some blues clustered together, and I was wondering, was it because it bordered a more higher traffic
I
area?
see. Yeah, that right-hand border in the northeast is New York is on the other side of it. Yeah, that's right. Okay, next slide.
You ready?
So this is an air monitoring station. This is actually housed in Elizabeth, New Jersey, just to give you a visual for what I mean by a station. So Elizabeth is up in that kind of northeast corridor that one of the people in the room just pointed out. Just to give you some geographic familiarity, it's about 20 miles from Manhattan. And on the border of with the city of Newark, where our panelists are giving you some context for it.
Is that by the airport?
By the port, yes.
Airport.
The port, it's not far.
I think it's by, I mean, both the port, the airport and the seaport are nearby, so yes, but I think more specifically the seaport. Next slide. Okay, so New Jersey's air monitoring network, just to explain for you what we do and what we measure. So we measure the ambient air, so that is the air that the public breathes, and not the air that's directly being emitted from a polluting source, so like a air stack, if you can visualize that at a factory. So we're measuring the ambient air. We're measuring criteria air pollutants, so Vivek talked about this a little bit. So ozone, particulate matter, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, and lead. And then it also measures the non-criteria air pollutants, including air toxics, would include things like benzene, toluene, ethylene, things like that you may have heard of. So next slide. So I want to talk to you about some air quality trends in New Jersey because the air quality is improving statewide in New Jersey. So New Jersey is meeting its health standards for carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, particulate matter, and lead. We're slightly above for ozone. So let me take you through some graphs. Next slide. So for carbon monoxide, the line in red is going to be the standard set by EPA. And then the line graph in blue is showing the trend in carbon monoxide from, it's cut off, I think the slide says 1970 or 1990 to 2022. Yeah, 1990 to 2022. So you can see that we're well below the standard. Next slide. So for particulate matter, this is going from 2001 to 2022. Again, that red, there's two red lines. There's a standard from 1997 and there's a standard from 2013. As you can see, we're below that line for PM 2.5. And then next slide. Or click again for me, right. So there's actually been a new standard since that 2013 standard in 2024. So you can see we're dipping a little bit below, but we're getting kind of too close to that standard. Next slide. So for ozone, again, we're looking at the lighter red, and the darker red is the trend from 1997 to 2022. So we're dipping slightly below, but really kind of at that standard and need to do better for ozone. So next slide. So just painting a picture that for a few of our criteria air pollutants, we are making improvements and making strides within New Jersey to be below the health standards set by EPA. But I'm sure you have questions because we're at an environmental justice panel and you just heard 3 panelists talk about the experiences, the lived experiences of their neighbors, of their family members, who are saying that they are struggling with health-based conditions, right? So there's a disconnect here between the data that we're seeing at the state and the data that's being collected by community scientists within environmental justice communities. So how can both be true? And so we know that, and just to really oversimplify history here, we know that that's because that there is a multiplicity of polluting facilities within overburdened communities. And that multiplicity of all of that pollution contributes to a cumulative impact, a very hyperlocal cumulative impact that those communities are facing, which is due to years of disinvestment and income and race-based discrimination. So all of those systemic factors all playing together is creating this discrepancy that I'm talking about, where at the state level, at all those air monitors that I showed you on the map, are collecting data about our criteria air pollutants, and it's showing, and it's true, that the air quality statewide is in attainment for just those few that I showed you. But hyper-locally within overburdened communities, that's not the case. So there is a disconnect there. It is true that both are true. And so I'm gonna talk to you about a few solutions that I had to kind of bridge that gap between the air monitoring that we're seeing at our air monitoring network at the state, but then the community science that's being collected on air monitoring in environmental justice communities.
Slide.
Yeah, we're having difficulties. I'm sorry. The mouse is up there and it's not on this computer. I don't know how it just did that. So let me try to stop.
Okay, and we're having technical difficulties for those online who didn't hear that, so bear with us for a minute.
You got a walkie-talkie?
Yes, early questions, yes.
I was at the event dealing with the reparations in New Jersey. And there was a report about that. Do you know about that work? Because I think this would be the kind of thing that would be of interest to the reparations.
I know of it, and your question is reminding me that maybe I need to tap into it a little bit deeper. I've not been too heavily involved, but I know that it is a thing.
Yes, it's a pretty big thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they need data, and what you're providing is a nuance.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
There's Tony Green in the chat, and he said, what were the criteria which define black carbon as the second leading cause of global warming after CO2?
Sorry, it's hard for me to hear because there's like an echo here.
I said, Tony Green in the chat wanted to know what were the criteria which define black carbon as the second leading cause of global warming after CO2?
Oh, does that do that?
Sorry, let me closer.
Yes.
Get that question. Can you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, sorry, it's hard to hear.
Tony Green asked, what were the criteria which define black carbon as the second leading cause of global warming after CO2?
That was for my presentation, I think.
I believe so.
Okay.
I just did the chat.
So one of the factors of black carbon is that it reduces the albedo effect. So this reduces the ability of our planet to reflect light. So that leads to more sunlight being absorbed. And the criteria is based in the literature. So I can pass over my citations once once the presentation series is over. So I'll send my reference for that.
So it makes the planet hotter.
Yes. Yes, Because it reduces our ability to reflect light in that. Yeah, that's the mechanism.
Which makes sense because it's soot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's gonna coat.
It's like when you wear a black t-shirt, right, and you absorb it. That's a good, I guess, analogy for the audience as well. Another question?
Yeah, so with New Jersey's like air quality trends like getting better, do you know how much you can attribute to specific actions New Jersey has done versus sort of like nationwide trends?
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about that. That's a good question. I would have to refer that to my air quality director. I don't know that I can
If you
answer
can
that
make the
myself.
main screen bigger for the virtual audience.
So,
Yeah,
sorry
but
about that.
we
That's fine.
have, he can't.
Yes.
And that just led to the question that just has been running in my mind, you know how they say the butterfly that flaps its wing in one part of the country, you can feel it halfway across the world. You know, that was last year's model, right, logo for this CEJA. How is it that, you were talking about the national standards, when we look at our food, when we look at food production, and again, not just, and global warming, energy conservation, how have we used the data for our national initiatives to keep on working on it so that, like he said, we can see it being felt better locally in our local communities if we work on it as a community, global community?
Yeah, some of my next slides are gonna try to address that in terms of connecting what's happening locally to some of the decisions, hopefully, that states can make. I'm not quite sure what to say about federally, like how the
Well, I
data
did.
that's being
Oh,
collected at the
thank
local level
So,
can trickle all the way up to
share
the
this
federal
one's a new
government,
one.
but I have some
This one.
perspectives to share for the state.
That's the new one?
That's a new one. Yeah.
And I would
How do
just,
Yeah.
I would just say from a local perspective, when you have more EJ community members getting involved and engaged in hyperlocal
Sure.
air quality monitoring, that is what is now kind of leading the state to do more and the country. Because that's why we're monitoring what's happening, because of the disconnects, because certain monitors happening in locations where cumulative impacts of pollution is not happening. You can have a monitor so far away from the communities
thank you.
that's right in the backyard. And so, and then you're looking at an average, right? But if you're looking hyper-locally as to what is happening in these EJ overburdened communities, you're gonna see a different story. And we are beginning to change the landscapes because we want transformational change in our communities. We want our individuals to stop, dying prematurely from these impacts. And so the power that's vested in the people and by the partnerships with academics, with the local DEPs, right, and those authorities, now you're able to say, this is what's happening in our neighborhood. This is what's happening over here. This is what the scientists say. How are we collectively coming together to make sure we're making real change?
Probably saying remove this and
I'm sorry, can you pull up my slides?
Oh, yeah.
damn. It's going to be honest. Okay, share screen. No, share
No,
screen.
I'm right here with her, right?
No.
There we go.
Okay.
Okay, we're gonna launch back in the slide deck and then we'll take the rest of the questions towards the end. So I think we're about halfway through. I'll try to be quick. Okay.
Right there?
Yeah, so what tools exist to bridge these gaps? Next slide. Okay, so actions to improve air quality specifically in New Jersey's environmental justice communities. So I've kind of grouped my thoughts into two categories: preventative actions and then restorative actions. So what I mean by that is preventative, like harm hasn't been done yet, and so what are actions that we can take to make sure that we're ensuring that we're preventing harm from being done? And then restorative actions that acknowledge harm has been done to this community. What can we do to restore that harm? So I have a couple of examples that I run through. These are not all the actions that the state are taking, but just two for the sake of time. The first is the Advanced Clean Truck Rule. So this is a California-based rule that New Jersey has adopted in 2021. And it says that it requires for truck manufacturers to sell zero emission trucks, diesel trucks, to New Jersey beginning in 2025, and requires that 40 to 75% of new zero emission truck sales by 2035. So we're building in, like, hey, for the future sale of trucks, we're going to require that they are electric or zero emission. And so that is a way to, in a preventative way, make sure that as goods travel back and forth in and out of the port and all across environmental justice communities, that they are clean at least. Another example that I want to spend some time on is New Jersey's environmental justice law. And so this requires DEP to evaluate the cumulative impacts that overburdened communities face when the DEP is reviewing permits for certain polluting facilities. And so next slide. The environmental justice law is precedent setting because New Jersey is the first state, and we're gonna go to the next slide.
Next day.
Okay, so the law was signed in 2020. So this law is precedent setting because it really flips and changes in a paradigm change way the way that environmental laws are treated within this country. I'm gonna explain what I mean by that. And so New Jersey is the first state in the country to have an environmental justice law. In that last picture, you can see Ms. Gaddy was at the signing of the law, one of our key champions within the state to help us get over the finish line of getting that law passed and signed. So in order for me to kind of defend this argument that I'm making about the EJ law being paradigm shifting and precedent setting, we kind of need to go back to how environmental laws were designed back in 1970s when the US EPA was created, when the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act was created. So let's stick with the Clean Air Act just as an example. So the way that it works, right, is our Congress within the federal government will create these laws, the Clean Air Act. They'll set standards for how much of the criteria air pollutants that we just talked about can be emitted, and they'll give that authority to implement those laws to the states. So to my agency, for example, the DEP. And so we will authorize a permit, which is just an authorization. It allows that facility to construct or to operate in a given place, right? The thing about permits, though, if you just click one more time for me, it's only given to the specific piece of equipment at the facilities. So per piece of equipment and per point of emission. So just for a very, very simple example, if we look at this factory, it's only gonna be permitting that air stack. So you get a permit for that. And if you are at or below those air emission limits, then you're good, you get a permit. It does not take into account the mobile sources of air pollution, so the truck counts and all the diesel trucks that ASADA and the Southward Environmental Alliance are really taking a look at. It does not take all of that into account. And we know that diesel trucks are emitting a lot of dirty stuff into the air, right? So next slide. Nor is it taking into account the multiplicity of the location of polluting facilities within a given neighborhood. So you'll have the warehouse, you'll have the factory, you'll have the power plant, you have the recycling facility. It's only gonna look at that one air stack per facility and say, are you at or below the emissions limits? Yes, you get a permit. Next slide. So what the environmental justice law does that actually flips the way that we do environmental policy in this country is it's gonna require the DEP to look at not only that one air stack, so that's just one type of thing that can be permitted. We can also look at things like boilers, for example. It's gonna look at all of the dirty diesel trucks that are going in and out to and from the facility and through the community, right? And it's gonna look at other stressors. So New Jersey has identified 26 stressors. I'll talk about that in the next couple of slides. So we're looking at everything in that box, and click again for me. We're gonna look at all of the neighboring polluting facilities because we know in a cumulative impacts way, it's not just that one facility that's causing harm, but it's everything within that community. And so, next slide. The environmental justice law in New Jersey has a process where we are requiring facilities to present an environmental justice impact statement. That impact statement is gonna look at everything that was circled in those boxes on the last slide, not just that one stack at the one facility, right? And we're going to determine whether or not there are some needed conditions. So as a condition of getting your permit, as a condition of getting your authorization, we're gonna require you to do some preventative measures, back to my last slide, putting that in an EJ decision document, and then we're gonna incorporate that into all of the permits that are being requested. So if you're requesting an air permit, a solid waste permit, a stormwater permit. So the way that it would happen before is if you were requesting a stormwater permit, that has no touch point or connection to mobile sources of air. Like those are fundamentally two different types of media. If you're going for a solid waste permit, they don't care about the dirty air emissions from your diesel trucks. So if you're at a public comment meeting as a member of the public and you're saying, hey, I know this is a meeting about solid waste, but I really care about air quality, they're not gonna listen to it. So the environmental justice process that we have in New Jersey makes it so that regardless of the permit that a facility is requesting, that they have to address everything, all of the stressors in a cumulative impact approach. Next slide. Okay, so next slide. The EJ law is applicable in these overburdened communities. It's just a visual for you to see. We've mapped them in New Jersey. We have a mapping tool where you can see all of these are located. And so it's gonna apply where you're proposing to be located within an OBC and you're one of 8 types of facilities. So we're looking at recycling centers, power plants, wastewater treatment plants, things like that, things that cause pollution. Next slide. And so like I said before, we're gonna require, okay. She said I got 10 minutes. Okay. Okay. So we're gonna skip through. The last slide just shows you the stressors that we have in New Jersey. There's 26 of them. And yeah, let me stay on this slide just to wrap up. So those are some of the preventive actions. The restorative actions that I just want to spend 30 seconds to talk about is building capacity for community scientists to do their community science work, because there has to be a handoff from community scientists to the agencies to be able to take action and make decisions with it. So our air quality director probably has just a handful of staff. So should we be doing more hyper-localized air monitoring? Yes. Can we? No. Just practically we can't be doing local air monitoring all across the state, and that's where the community scientists pick up. So the more that, and it has some examples, but don't have time to share about how we are building capacity for community scientists, because when you hand off that data and you're saying, hey, I think there's a conclusive argument to be made that there's a hot spot, meaning there's something that the agency doesn't know about and that we have to further investigate, we can then take that, replicate that science, do some quality assurance, and then use it to take some further actions. So a further action can be enforcement. So we can look to see, hey, is there a permitted facility in the area? Are they causing that hotspot? And are they in violation of the permit? And if so, we can take some actions against them. We can issue penalties. We can issue a lawsuit. For example, we've done that in the past. And then lastly, we can use that data to update our state implementation plan. So if there's a hotspot locally, that's a good thing, because we can update our state implementation plan to affect the statewide. So that improves the air quality statewide by looking at a very hyper-localized example. So that's all the time that I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Candace, for sharing with us what actions are being taken on the state level and how it is connecting to the community level. And without further ado, we'll have our last presentation from Terrence Gates.
So obviously, because I was late, it's singing out a flight there from Washington State, giving a similar presentation. So it just really shows how important this issue is, and how there are common themes in terms of the need to advance environmental justice, but also with a focus on these ports. And there's many environmental justice groups and social justice groups and climate advocates who are fighting different aspects of what's connected to the environmental injustices or the environment or advancing environmental justice. However, there's been very few communities, particularly those that are the most impacted by our ports, who have had a focus on it. And so we are grateful for organizations that have stepped up, like the Southport Environmental Alliance, and really made ports a priority to me in New Jersey for the entire state, and really influencing what's going on in the Mid-Atlantic, because we're talking about in Wilmington, Delaware, the truck count and the air monitoring that's going on in the south of Newark, New Jersey, that needs to be going on throughout the entire state. Because I won't have time to get through my presentation, even though if they can bring it up, they will, I've done two things. One, I have an email set up here. I'll leave my laptop here.
Yeah,
If you don't mind, you can come up, just put your, I keep forgetting that, sorry y'all. I'm sorry. You can just put your email address inside the field and I'll hit send. And so I'm gonna pass around these documents. This is something I produced to kind of explain, and I use New Jersey as a prime example, because as I was going around to ports, that's what I do. The gentleman asked me, what do you do? And so I am, work for Friends of the Earth. It's a national and international nonprofit. My role is Senior Ports and Freights Campaigner, and part of how that role came about was really because of the work that the Southport Environmental Alliance was doing. And it needed to be done, it needed support there, but also in other communities like in Louisiana, Savannah, Georgia, again, Seattle, Washington, where I just left. And what I noticed is that we were talking about port operations and not the entire shipping, the maritime shipping supply chain, its entire impact on our community from the beginning to the end, from pollution to lack of workforce development opportunities. I'm not talking about just green jobs, green careers. And so this document, I wanted to show what is a good port versus what is a bad port versus what is a good port, but more importantly, specifically, what are the issues? Why is this an environmental justice issue? Why is this an equity issue? Why is this a race issue? It's because it's intentional to do more harm than good to people of color than it is to people who do not live in those communities, who are not entrapped in those communities, who are not being gentrified out of those communities. And so this is going from the block to the border. This is explanatory to the stakeholders and the decision makers at the ports. It explains well to the elected officials who do more transactional engagements with the port than transformational, because they don't know, and so they're signing off on support letters for projects that includes expanding your ports, and those things are harmful to you. And so this document gives you some information if you're interested in it. I don't have more physical copies, but again, you can have an email directly to yourself, but I'll pass it around the room. And then I'll share it online as well.
Okay.
And so the presentation is up.
It's coming, 1 second.
I'll go through a few.
2 monitors.
We just need to get it on there.
Or you guys still trying to work through it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
You still working through it?
it's the computer, 1 second.
2 monitors.
So pretty much it's impossible to focus on every port. And so we prioritize the ports in the Mid-Atlantic, which is part of the area we're from, and also the Southeast, so pretty much the whole East Coast, and then the Northwest. And so these areas include some of the busiest or biggest ports in the country. I think Newark is the third largest or third busiest. Third largest.
Okay, so this in that, no, that, then do this. Okay.
So I'll go through, we just go to the next slide.
I'm changing computers after this, don't worry.
This was a video that featured a video that was from one of the U.S. senators who's really been a champion. There's something called the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act. And there's something also called Justice 40. I'm sure everyone in this room has heard about it. There's Democrats did an excellent job at fighting for it. They have not done an excellent job at backing it up. They've gone silent since it passed, and ports have been through the Clean Ports programs and a few other examples that I don't have time to give. They kind of missed the boat on this one, and we needed our federal officials holding their feet to the fire around Justice 40 and definitely around that Clean Ports program and other funding opportunities. Next slide, that are available. We can go to the next one. I can send you the video too for the message. We can, just click those things for me. So this is just our theory of change. Again, you're going to get this. What motivates the work that I do every day? Next slide. Part of it is increasing the number of organizations, community-based groups. not just environmental justice groups, but community-based organizations, because we gotta get information out there. We gotta go to where people are, and so our goal is to one, attract as many community-based organizations, particularly those that are servicing near port communities, to one, buy into this, to come to trainings, to engage in the monthly SWEA meetings. Even if you don't live in the South Ward, you can learn a lot and see how it can be applicable, because you know if they can do it in the South Ward, you can do it in Camden, East Orange, and other places that are needed. They talked about this all the time. This is why it hurts us. This is why it's an environmental justice issue. Premature death, increased infant mortality. So our Black women and our Hispanic women are being impacted by something we can't see, right? Because we usually don't take action unless we see it doing something to us. But every day, these things are impacted. Next slide. They talked about asthma. According to the American Lung Association, 72 million people of color live in a county with at least one felon grade for air pollution, intentional. And so environmental justice has to become talked about like criminal justice, like gun control, every day, like sanitation issues, police issues. Has to be right up there with that, in your living room, in your church, on your job, right? Next, beauty salons. I see a lot of things. We talked about ports being hotspots. That's why they are the target. They are not our enemy. They need to be our partners. We need people's power and political power to create that and hold them accountable. The second part of what we're trying to do with these organizations, we are the big brain, we are the big brain that drives resources, both private dollars and federal dollars, to local groups. And we do not take 75% and 50%. No, we want the majority to go to you and get the work done that you need done. Why we do that is because there's a lot of barriers. Sometimes our community-based organizations don't have the resources or the talent pool to apply for these large grants and invest all this time, so you need support. But you need support that's not going to exploit you. And so we're about driving dollars to those groups that are both from our private funders, which we've sent over $150,000 just in the past 9 months to 3 different groups in these troubled areas, and we're still raising more. Next. We can go past this. Objectives and goals for post-port work, I kind of touched on that. Next slide. What should be your key takeaways? And I'll end with this one. Raising funds to impact advocacy efforts. Go get the money, you fought for it. You're still fighting for it. The founders of environmental justice fought for the Clean Ports funding. And just because the ports had to be the lead on it, don't mean that we don't have a right to probe about it, to hold them accountable about it, and to receive some of those resources. That's what the EPA, that's what the federal government is expecting also. Directing resources to EJ communities, I just talked about that. Send the money to the groups, demand that the money comes to you. Partnering with organizations and partnering with these big brain groups are fine, but environmental justice principles say that you are the voice, you are the experts, and so we need to be there to support you and lift you up, even if you come from environmental justice communities like me and still work for a big brain. Bridging the gaps between ports and environmental justice communities. Another example, Kim Gaddy and the Port Advisory Council, Regina is the chair. Those type of things you need to be asking for. You need to talk to Regina and Kim about, well, how did you get that started? What did it take? Port Advisory Council keeps us at the table all the time, not at the press conference, after the fact, all right? We want to help plan the press conference, okay? And host the press conference in our facilities, in our community. That's the type of collaboration that we're looking for. Addressing the remediation of legacy pollution. Just because you're used to doing it, get unused to doing it. Just because you're comfortable neglecting us and avoiding us and poisoning us, get unused to it, okay? And lastly, keeping climate action campaigns alive and well. You can do this from your church, you can do this from your job, you can bring awareness to what needs to happen in terms of what we're facing with our climate, particularly with advancing environmental justice. I always challenge people to do this. There's 17 principles. Look at one. Find one that you connect with. Find one that your organization that you're a part of connect with, and put that into your mission. That's how you can do your part if you're not an organizational leader. Am I right, from Gabby? Thank you for your time.
I want to thank all our panelists for today. We will take one question as time is out. If you have any.
You had 2 hands in the back? No? I thought it was you.
Oh, I did.
She was saying amen.
Yeah, I guess I do 2 questions. Then you can take everyone. So does the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection take into consideration asthma levels and other kind of health indicators in addition to emissions and in addressing issues like or in the permitting process, or is that considered too attenuated?
So we have a Department of Health that monitors that, and we have an Office of Environmental Health that works with our Department of Health to build tools and resources and things that are more on the education and awareness side. I can't say that health-based outcomes are necessarily influencing like limit standards. There should be a linkage there, yes. But really what's influencing it is the federal government and the standards that EPA and our agencies are setting at the federal level. And some states like New Jersey have the authority to set stricter standards. And so, for example, I can think of like our lead standard has recently been updated, and EPA followed after the fact to match what states were doing. So I'll say on lead, on PFAS, not quite sure on like respiratory illnesses, how that is changing standards that are being set, but I know that states, including Jersey, are taking a leading role on PFAS and lead to set more health protective standards in the federal government. It's kind of a chicken or the egg of whether or not federal government is setting it and the state will match it, or the state will set a standard and the federal government will catch up. So I'm just not the expert, unfortunately, on air, but I know that for lead and PFAS, other types of contaminants, we are.
It's happening at the federal level, and I think that ultimately it's going to get down to the state level. Really, the feds should be paying more air monitoring at ports, and recently their Attorney General called them out for that. So they cited themselves and said we have been doing a horrible job at monitoring air quality at ports. And so for the past year, SADA was a part of that. We fought to increase soot regulations. That was one of the ways to address it. And so that was impacted. We joined with health experts from different hospitals who actually have their hospitals and institutions that have environmental justice offices and departments. Who knew that when you go to Beth Israel Hospital or John Hopkins Hospital, they have environmental, we're not looking for an environmental justice office, already at the hospital, but they're there for a reason. They have support, they have data, and yes, that data was used for us to fight, because there was a tug of war. They wanted to lower the standard, meaning it's okay to pollute you more. Imagine having to go down, spend thousands of dollars going down to DC literally to plead with these people. Regina was there. That you have to fight harder against those Republicans that says it's okay, because it's became that an issue of black and white, Republicans and Democrats, where Republicans have an obligation to protect the interests of us too, even if we don't live in their voting district. Once you are elected, what you do impacts everybody. That's why we're always in these fights. And so when it comes around protecting the interests of us, I think yes, it's more that the states can do, but they need to be empowered by the federal government. And it should be some consistency.
And by our state legislature, because a lot of what we can and can't do is set by not the agency within the executive branch, but the legislative branch. So it really is incumbent upon voters who are fed up to elect the people that are going to have environmental interests in mind, so that our legislature can set policy like through acts that then the DEP can effectuate and implement. Like there's some things we can do through executive action. So one example is we just released a set of climate change regulations called NJPAC. Real is an acronym that I won't waste time to tell you what it means. But basically updating our climate change projections, because in New Jersey, our projections are from the 1990s. We were using climate science that's just so out of date. And so requiring developers and builders to be elevating above sea level rise based on 1990s predictions of how sea levels will rise makes entirely no sense. So our governor, through executive action, proposed, and it's under public comment now, those regulations, but the next administration could, you know, if those rules were adopted, could upend those rules. So it really requires laws, and we can't do that without voters.
And with that, we will conclude. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, panelists, for providing us with this information. I hope you guys can take away some strategies to introduce to your communities. And I'm so sorry that we had technical difficulties that took away our time, but please feel free to come up to us during the symposium. We will be here. And also the great thing that our information is on the Hoover app, so you can also contact us through that way. So thank you all so much.